A millionaire abandons a valuable horse injured and lame on the brink of death. Rescued by a humble girl, what she does is unbelievable. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when the hooves of Black Lightning echoed against the ground of the main training arena of Blackwood Estate. The magnificent purebred stallion, black as the darkest night, moved with the elegance of a king, fully aware of his own majesty. From the upper gallery, Mr. Alexander Blackwood watched with piercing eyes every movement of the animal, his greatest pride and the most precious jewel of his equestrian empire. "Harder, Richard! Make him gallop like it's his last day!" bellowed Mr. Blackwood, his voice reverberating throughout the grounds. The rider, accustomed to his employer's demands, tightened the reins and pressed the horse's flanks with more force. Blackwood Estate stood imposingly in the heart of the Guadalupe Valley, its marble and stone stables a testament to the power and wealth that Mr. Blackwood had accumulated over decades. Every corner of the property was meticulously cared for, every detail calculated to impress visitors and potential buyers. "Mr. Blackwood," interrupted Joseph, his trusted foreman, "the Brazilian buyers have arrived." Blackwood adjusted his expensive jacket and smoothed his graying mustache with a practiced gesture. "Let them wait in the trophy room. I want them to see what excellence means before we talk business." As he walked toward the mansion, his firm steps echoed on the Italian marble floor. The walls were adorned with photographs of award-winning horses and trophies that gleamed under the light of the enormous crystal chandeliers. Each award, each recognition, was a reminder of his rise from the depths of poverty to the pinnacle of success. "Gentlemen," he greeted as he entered the room where three men in expensive suits immediately stood up. "Welcome to the cradle of the finest horses in America." The meeting unfolded like so many others. Blackwood dominated the conversation, boasting of his achievements, mixing anecdotes of his successes with subtle hints of his power and influence. However, there was something in his gaze, a shadow of unease that only Joseph, after 15 years of service, could perceive. That night, after the buyers had left, Mr. Blackwood locked himself in his study. Seated in front of his mahogany desk, he contemplated an old photograph in a silver frame. In it, a young Alexander held the reins of a horse in a modest stable. "Do you need anything else, sir?" asked Joseph from the doorway. "Prepare everything for next month's race," he replied without taking his eyes off the photograph. "Black Lightning must win. It's not an option, it's an obligation." "But sir, the vet mentioned that the horse needs rest after the last event." "The vet doesn't pay the bills," Blackwood exploded, slamming the desk. "That horse is my ticket to closing the deal with the Brazilians. If he doesn't win, everything I've built could crumble." Joseph nodded silently, knowing all too well the weight of those words. He had witnessed how his employer had built his empire from scratch, but he had also seen the cost of that ambition: broken relationships, deep enmities, and a loneliness that all the trophies in the world couldn't fill. In the stables, Black Lightning snorted restlessly in his luxurious stall. The animal, valued at millions, received the best care money could buy. Yet, in his dark eyes, there was a glimmer of sadness that contrasted with the luxury surrounding him. "Rest, my friend," whispered Richard, the jockey, stroking his neck. "Tomorrow will be another day of training." Meanwhile, in his study, Mr. Blackwood reviewed financial documents with a furrowed brow. The numbers didn't lie. He needed Black Lightning to win the next race. His empire, built with decades of relentless work, depended on it. The memory of his years of poverty, of the humiliations he had endured, fueled his determination with a fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. "This time there's no room for error," he murmured to himself, as the shadows of the night spread over Blackwood Estate, foreshadowing the events to come. The early morning arrived with a leaden sky that promised rain. Richard arrived early at the stables, finding Joseph already awake, watching Black Lightning with concern. "Have you noticed it too?" asked Richard, approaching quietly. Joseph nodded, without taking his eyes off the stallion. "Something's not right. He's putting less weight on his front leg." The magnificent animal, usually proud and energetic, showed subtle signs of discomfort that only experienced eyes could detect. His movements, normally fluid as water, now had an almost imperceptible hesitation. "We should call the vet," suggested Richard, but he was interrupted by the authoritative voice of Mr. Blackwood. "The only one coming today is the Brazilian trainer," declared Blackwood, appearing suddenly in the stable. "We need to show him that Black Lightning is at his best." "But sir," Joseph tried to intervene, The horse needs to win that race." Blackwood cut him off, his face hardening. "Do you know how much money is at stake? The Brazilians don't just want to buy Black Lightning. They want to partner with Blackwood Estate to breed a new line of champions." At that moment, Emily, Mr. Blackwood's daughter, entered the stable. At 25, she was the spitting image of her late mother. Elegant, determined, and with a deep love for horses that she had inherited from her childhood on the estate. "Dad, I heard Black Lightning is—" "He's perfectly fine," her father interrupted. "And you should be preparing to receive the guests, not hanging around the stables like a servant." Emily pressed her lips together, holding back the retort burning in her throat. Since childhood, she had learned that contradicting her father was futile. However, she approached the horse and tenderly stroked his neck, noticing the tension in his muscles. The Brazilian trainer, Paulo Santos, arrived shortly after. He was a burly man with expert eyes that quickly noticed the same thing Joseph and Richard had seen. "Mr. Blackwood," he began cautiously, "the horse shows signs of—" "Show us your training techniques," Blackwood interrupted, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "My employees are eager to learn from the best." The training session was tense. Paulo tried to be as gentle as possible with the horse, but Mr. Blackwood's constant interventions demanding more speed, more intensity, more spectacle, made the atmosphere increasingly heavy. Emily watched from the stands, biting her lip with worry. Beside her, Ellen, the estate's vet who had just arrived, shared her concern. "This isn't right," Ellen murmured. "I've treated Black Lightning since he arrived at the estate. I've never seen him like this." "What can we do?" whispered Emily. "Your father needs to cancel his participation in the race. The horse needs rest and treatment." The rain began to fall softly on the covered arena, while on the track, Black Lightning continued to execute the movements demanded by the trainer, each time with more effort. At the end of the session, Paulo approached Mr. Blackwood with a serious expression. "Mr. Blackwood, as a professional, I must warn you. What you must do is prepare the documents for the partnership." Blackwood cut him off. "My lawyer will review them tomorrow." That night, as the rain intensified over the estate, Joseph stayed late in the stable. He watched Black Lightning, who, restless in his stall, seemed to sense that something was wrong. "Don't worry, my friend," murmured the foreman. "We'll find a way to help you." In his study, Mr. Blackwood reviewed the preliminary contracts with the Brazilians, a glass of brandy in his hand and the old photograph on his desk. The empire he had built was about to reach new heights, and nothing, not even the well-being of his best horse, would stand in his way. The storm brewing wasn't just the one roaring in the night sky. In the air, there was the tension of wrong, decisions and inevitable consequences that would soon change the fate of everyone at Blackwood Estate. The San Lorenzo racetrack buzzed with activity that morning. The rain from the previous day had left the track wet, and the grey clouds still threatened more precipitation. In the temporary stables, Richard prepared Black Lightning for the most important race of their lives, while Joseph watched with a heavy heart. "The track vets should check him before the race," Joseph suggested in a low voice, making sure Mr. Blackwood, who was talking with the Brazilian investors in the VIP stands, couldn't hear him. "You know what the boss said," replied Richard, adjusting the saddle with trembling hands. "If we don't run today, the deal falls through." Emily appeared in the stable, elegantly dressed for the occasion but with worry etched on her face. "Richard, please be careful. The track is slippery and Black Lightning isn't at his best." The jockey nodded, stroking the stallion's neck as the horse, restless, pawed the ground with his hooves. Ellen, the vet, approached discreetly and performed a quick check. "This is madness," she murmured, noticing the tension in the animal's muscles. "The moisture will only worsen his condition." In the stands, Mr. Blackwood boasted to Paulo Santos and the other Brazilian investors. "Today, you'll witness why Black Lightning is the best horse in all of Latin America. Your investment isn't just safe, it's destined to multiply." The announcer's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, calling the horses to the starting line. Richard mounted Black, Lightning with a knot in his stomach. The stallion, usually majestic on the track, walked with a less confident step than usual. "Oh my God!" exclaimed Emily, gripping the railing. "Dad, please stop him." But Mr. Blackwood ignored his daughter's pleas, his eyes fixed on the track where his fortune was at stake. The horses lined up at the start. The sky rumbled with distant thunder as tension built in the air. The starting shot cracked like a whip in the humid air. Black Lightning started strong, but from the first moment, something was wrong. His movements, normally fluid and precise, seemed forced. Richard tried to maintain control as the horse struggled to keep pace. "Go! Go!" Mr. Blackwood shouted from the stands, pounding the railing in fury as other horses took the lead. On the final turn, the inevitable happened. The wet track, the pressure of the forced pace, and the pain in his muscles were too much. Black Lightning lost his balance. His legs slipped in the mud and he fell heavily, dragging Richard with him. A collective gasp rose from the stands. Emily ran toward the track, followed by Ellen and Joseph. Richard had gotten up, bruised but unhurt. However, Black Lightning remained on the ground, his eyes filled with pain and fear. "We need help here," Ellen shouted, kneeling beside the animal. "The injury is serious, but with the right treatment, get him up! Make him stand!" roared Mr. Blackwood, who had reached the track, followed by the Brazilian investors. His face was twisted with rage and humiliation. "Mr. Blackwood," Paulo Santos interjected, "this changes the terms of our agreement. An injured horse—" "Get out of my sight," Blackwood exploded. "All of you out!" The investors withdrew in silence, taking with them the hopes of the business partnership. As the track vets attended to Black Lightning, Mr. Blackwood stepped away and called Joseph. "Tonight," he whispered with an icy voice, "you'll take that animal far from here. I don't want to see it again." "But sir," the foreman protested, "with treatment he could recover." "So it's an order," Blackwood snapped. "Take him north where no one will find him. To me, that horse no longer exists." Emily, who had overheard the conversation, confronted her father. "You can't do this. It's cruel and inhumane." "I can and I will," Blackwood replied, grabbing his daughter's arm. "And you won't say a word. We're going back to the estate, now." As the rain began to fall again over the racetrack, Ellen worked frantically to stabilize the injured horse, ignoring Mr. Blackwood's orders. In her eyes burned the determination to save the animal, unaware that in a few hours, Black Lightning's fate would take an unexpected turn at the hands of someone who had yet to enter the scene. The dawn painted the sky in shades of pink when Lucy Hernandez stepped out of her modest home at El Refugio Ranch. At 26, she had turned the small plot of land inherited from her parents into a sanctuary for animals in need. With determined steps, she headed toward the nearby creek to fetch water for her charges. 2 lame dogs, an elderly donkey, and 3 horses rescued from dire situations. "I'll be back, Cinnamon," she said to her favorite mare, a veteran she had rescued from a traveling circus years ago. The animal whinnied softly from her corral, as if understanding every word. The ranch was modest compared to the opulent estates of the region, but every corner overflowed with love and care. The facilities, though simple, were clean and well-maintained. Thanks to Lucy's tireless work and her only employee, Manuel, a local young man who shared her passion for animals. As she walked along the path to the creek, Lucy mentally reviewed her worries. The vet bills were piling up, and the cost of feed for the animals was rising. Yet, her determination never wavered. "We'll find a way," she repeated daily. The sound of a weak, pained whinny interrupted her thoughts. At first she thought it was her imagination, but the sound repeated clearer this time. Leaving the water buckets, she followed the sound to a cluster of bushes near the creek. What she found chilled her blood. A magnificent black horse lay on the ground, covered in mud and showing clear signs of pain. His eyes, though frightened, held a glimmer of nobility that captivated her instantly. "Easy, beautiful," Lucy whispered, approaching cautiously. The animal tried to rise when he saw her, but the pain stopped him. "Don't move, you're safe now." With expert hands, Lucy examined the horse. The injury to his front leg was serious, and he had several bruises on his body. But what struck her most was the quality of the animal. It was clear he was no ordinary horse. "Manuel!" she shouted, hoping her helper was close enough to hear. To her relief, the young man came running minutes later. "My God!" Manuel exclaimed when he saw the stallion. "How did he get here?" "Someone abandoned him," Lucy replied, noticing the marks of a high-quality saddle on the horse's back. And from his condition, it wasn't long ago. Together they improvised a stretcher with old tarps and, with infinite care, moved the horse to the ranch. Lucy mentally thanked the veterinary first aid lessons she had learned from Mr. Paul, the local vet, who often helped her in exchange for work at the ranch. "Manuel, I need you to go get Mr. Paul," she instructed, as she prepared a space in the main stable. "And bring all the medicinal herbs you can find in his garden." While she waited, Lucy began cleaning the horse's wounds with warm water and herbal extracts she always kept for emergencies. She spoke softly to him, gradually earning his trust. "You're too beautiful to be abandoned," she murmured, noticing details that revealed his origins. The well-groomed coat, the perfectly formed hooves, the musculature of an athlete. "What's your story, beautiful?" Mrs. Rose, her closest neighbor, appeared in the stable with a basket of medicinal herbs. "Lucy, dear, I saw Manuel running like the devil was after him. What good heavens!" "I found him by the creek," Lucy explained, thanking her for the herbs. "Someone left him to die." "This isn't just any horse," observed Mrs. Rose, who had worked at several important estates in her youth. "Look at his bearing, his build. This is a racehorse, and an expensive one." Lucy nodded, a lump forming in her throat. What kind of person could abandon an injured animal like this? Mr. Paul arrived shortly after, and his expression upon seeing the horse confirmed Mrs. Rose's suspicions. "This is a top-tier thoroughbred," he declared as he examined him. "The injury is serious, but with the right treatment and a lot of care he could recover." "I'll do whatever it takes," Lucy said with determination. "Child," Mr. Paul warned, "the treatment will be costly, and with all the animals you already have—" "I'll find a way," she interrupted. "I won't abandon him like others did." As the vet prepared the first injections and bandages, Lucy lost herself in the horse's eyes. There was a mix of pain and gratitude in them that touched her soul. At that moment, she knew her life was about to change forever, though she couldn't imagine how much. The first week with the mysterious stallion was a constant challenge for Lucy. Each dawn found her in the stable, changing bandages and applying the ointments Mr. Paul had prescribed. The horse, though still cautious, began to respond to her care with growing trust. "You'll need stronger antibiotics," Mr. Paul explained during his follow-up visit. "And these special bandages, they're not cheap, Lucy." She nodded, biting her lip as she mentally calculated her meager savings. "Can I pay you in installments?" The vet looked at her with paternal concern. "Child, you already owe me 3 months of treatments for the other animals." "I'll sell my silver necklace," Lucy decided, touching the only piece of jewelry she had inherited from her mother. "And I have some chickens that—" "Absolutely not," Mrs. Rose interrupted. "That necklace is your only memory of your mother. I have some savings." "No, Mrs. Rose," Lucy smiled gently. "You already do too much helping with the animals. I'll find a way." Manuel, who had been listening silently while cleaning the stable, spoke up. "I can look for extra work at the nearby ranches. They're hiring temporary help on weekends." Meanwhile, at Blackwood Estate, the storm was just beginning. Joseph entered Mr. Blackwood's study, his face pale and sweaty. "What do you mean you couldn't find him?" Blackwood roared, rising from his chair. "Her, sir? I searched the entire northern area, sir. The horse, he's not where I left him." Mr. Blackwood threw his brandy glass against the wall. "Idiot! An injured horse doesn't just disappear." Emily, passing by the hallway, stopped when she overheard the conversation. Her heart leapt as she realized Black Lightning might still be alive. "Sir," Joseph continued, "there are rumors in town. They say a girl who runs an animal shelter to—" "Find him!" Blackwood ordered, slamming the desk. "That horse has our brand. If someone finds him, our reputation—" Back at El Refugio, Lucy had rigged a pulley system with old ropes to help the stallion stand for short periods. "That's it, beautiful," she encouraged as the animal took his first trembling steps. Stronger every day. The horse responded to her voice with soft whinnies, his eyes following her with a mix of trust and gratitude that melted the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. That night, after selling her necklace in town, Lucy returned with the medications and some sacks of feed. Her eyes were red, but her determination remained unshaken. "Tomorrow we'll start water therapy," she explained to the horse as she gently brushed his coat. "Mr. Paul says it will help with the inflammation." A noise outside the stable startled her. Manuel appeared at the door, agitated. "Lucy, people are asking around town about a black horse. People from Blackwood Estate." The name landed like a weight in Lucy's stomach. Everyone knew the reputation of Alexander Blackwood and his equestrian empire. "Do you think he's—" Manuel began, looking at the stallion. "It doesn't matter where he came from," Lucy said firmly. "He was abandoned, injured, left to die. Now he's my responsibility." Mr. Paul, who had returned to drop off more medications, overheard the conversation. "Lucy, if that horse belongs to Blackwood, what kind of owner abandons an animal like that?" she interrupted, her eyes blazing with indignation. "They have no right to claim him after what they did." The vet sighed, knowing well the young woman's determination. "Be careful, child. Blackwood has a lot of power in the region." That night, as she did her final check of the animals, Lucy found something she hadn't noticed before, a small embroidered mark on the remnants of the blanket the horse still wore when she found him. The initials B.E. confirmed her suspicions. "Don't worry," she whispered to the stallion, who watched her with his deep black eyes. "I won't let them hurt you again." In the darkness of the stable, stroking the horse's neck, Lucy couldn't imagine the magnitude of the storm brewing. Alexander Blackwood wasn't a man accustomed to losing, and the battle for Black Lightning's fate was just beginning. The peace of the morning at El Refugio was shattered by the roar of several engines. 3 black luxury SUVs stopped in front of the ranch's modest gate, kicking up clouds of dust. Lucy, who was changing the stallion's bandages, felt her heart race at the commotion. "Manuel," she called as she hurried to the entrance. Her helper was already there, watching with concern as Alexander Blackwood stepped out of the first vehicle, followed by Joseph and 2 men who looked like bodyguards. "So this is the famous animal shelter," Blackwood said with disdain, his eyes scanning the modest but clean facilities. "Where's the owner?" "That would be me," Lucy replied, standing, tall despite her 5-foot frame barely reaching the imposing rancher's shoulder. "How can I help you?" Blackwood studied her with a mix of surprise and contempt. "You have something that belongs to me, girl. A black thoroughbred. I've come to take him back." "Are you talking about the injured horse I found abandoned a week ago?" Lucy asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "The one someone left to die by the creek?" A muscle twitched in Blackwood's jaw. "That horse bears my brand. He's the property of Blackwood Estate." "Animals aren't property," Lucy shot back. "They're living beings that feel and suffer, and that horse was intentionally abandoned." Joseph, standing behind his employer, looked down, unable to meet the young woman's accusing eyes. "Listen carefully, girl." Blackwood took a step forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You don't know who you're dealing with. That horse is worth more than your entire ranch and the mangy animals you have here." "And that's why you abandoned him when he got hurt?" Lucy challenged, not backing down. "I've spent my savings on his medications. I've spent sleepless nights caring for him. Where were you then?" The argument drew the attention of Mrs. Rose, who was approaching with her basket of medicinal herbs. Seeing the scene, the elderly woman hurried over. "Mr. Blackwood," she interjected, "I've known this girl since she was born. She's only trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Blackwood scoffed. "The right thing is to respect private property. Joseph, handle this." The foreman stepped forward but stopped when Manuel and 2 other ranch workers stood beside Lucy. "If you want the horse," Lucy declared clearly, "you'll have to show me documents proving ownership and pay the vet bills. And even then I'll need guarantees that he'll receive proper care." Blackwood let out a dry laugh. "You're asking me for guarantees? Do you know how many champion horses I've bred?" "I know what you do to the ones that get injured," she replied, her eyes blazing with indignation. At that moment, a familiar whinny echoed from the stable. Blackwood's face darkened as he recognized the sound. "You have 24 hours, he said, adjusting his hat. "Tomorrow I'll be back with the police and the necessary documents, and if you try to hide the horse..." He left the threat hanging in the air. As the SUVs drove off in a cloud of dust, Lucy felt her legs tremble. Mrs. Rose hugged her tightly. "Oh dear," the elderly woman sighed. "You've stepped into the lion's den." "I couldn't do anything else," Lucy replied, regaining her composure. "You saw how the horse was when we found him. I can't return him to someone who abandoned him like that." Manuel approached, worried. "What are we going to do? Tomorrow they'll come back with the police." "Then we need to be prepared," Lucy declared with determination. "Mr. Paul must have documentation of all the injuries and the condition we found the horse in, and we need witnesses to the abandonment." As she returned to the stable, Lucy felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The stallion greeted her with a soft whinny, as if understanding the situation. "Don't worry, beautiful," she whispered, stroking his neck. "This battle is just beginning." At Blackwood Estate, Alexander Blackwood was throwing objects against the walls of his study, furious. Emily, listening to the shouting from the hallway, smiled to herself. Perhaps for the first time someone had the courage to stand up to her father. Night fell over El Refugio, but no one slept. A battle was coming, and the fate of much more than a horse hung in the balance. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when Lucy arrived at Mr. Paul's clinic. The vet was already waiting, surrounded by folders and documents. "I've spent the night organizing everything," he explained as he spread out photos and reports on his desk. "Here's the complete documentation of the condition we found the horse in, the injuries, the treatments." "Applied?" Lucy reviewed the papers with trembling hands. "Do you think it's enough?" "I also have this," Mr. Paul added, pulling out a yellow envelope. "These are the blood test results. They show elevated levels of performance-enhancing drugs. We're pushing him too hard, Lucy." At that moment, a young, elegant woman entered the clinic. Lucy recognized her immediately. It was Emily Blackwood. "I'm not here on behalf of my father," Emily quickly clarified, seeing Lucy's defensive look. "I'm here to help. I knew something was wrong with Black Lightning before the race." "Everyone did." "Why would you help us?" Lucy asked cautiously. "Because I love horses as much as you do," Emily replied sincerely. "And because it's time someone stood up to my father." Meanwhile, at Blackwood Estate, Alexander Blackwood was meeting with his lawyer, Mr. Ramirez, known for winning impossible cases. "The papers are in order," Ramirez assured. "The horse is legally registered as property of Blackwood Estate. No judge will question that." "I don't just want the horse back," Blackwood growled. "I want that girl to learn her place, file charges against her for theft." Joseph, listening from the doorway, felt a knot in his stomach. He knew the truth about the horse's abandonment, but years of loyalty and fear kept him silent. Back at El Refugio, the community had mobilized. Mrs. Rose had called the neighbors, and several of them offered to testify about the condition they found the horse in. "My son saw them that night," declared Mr. Ramon, a former ranch hand. "He saw them abandon the injured animal." Manuel returned from town with more news. "I've spoken to Ellen, the vet at Blackwood Estate. She's willing to testify about the horse's condition before the race." Lucy nodded, grateful for the support but worried about the emotional cost for everyone involved. "I don't want anyone to lose their job for helping us." "There are times when you have to do what's right," Mrs. Rose interjected firmly, "and this is one of those times." In the stable, the stallion was showing signs of improvement. His eyes were brighter, and he could stand for longer periods. Emily, who had stayed to help, watched him with tears in her eyes. "He was everyone's favorite at the estate," she confessed. "But to my father, he was just another investment." "Why do they call him Black Lightning?" Lucy asked as she applied ointment to the injured leg. "Because of his speed and elegance," Emily smiled. "When he ran, it was like he was flying over the track." The afternoon wore on, and with it the tension grew. Mr. Paul had contacted a friend, a lawyer specializing in animal rights, who agreed to represent Lucy pro bono. "The law isn't clear in these cases," explained Mr. Garcia during an emergency meeting. "But we have evidence of abuse and abandonment, and public opinion could be our best ally." At that moment, a local journalist, alerted by the rumors in town, arrived at the ranch looking for the story. Lucy hesitated, but Emily encouraged her. "The truth needs to come out," Emily insisted. "It's the only way things will change." As the sun set, Lucy did her usual routine with Black Lightning. The horse, oblivious to the legal battles being fought over his fate, whinnied softly under her care. "Today we bought some time," Lucy whispered. "But I feel the real test is just beginning." The first rays of sunlight found Lucy reviewing her accounts at the small table in her kitchen. The bills piled up in front of her: feed for the animals, medications, pending repairs to the stable. Her victory in court had been just the beginning of a larger battle. "I don't understand," she murmured as she reread the bank's letter. "How can they reject the loan renewal so suddenly?" Manuel, arriving with fresh milk from town, brought more bad news. "The feed store says they can't give us any more credit, Lucy, and the price of feed doubled overnight." "Doubled?" Lucy felt her stomach knot. "That's impossible." "Mr. Ramon says Blackwood bought all the feed warehouses in the region," Manuel explained quietly, "and he's forbidden them from selling directly to us." At that moment, Emily arrived at the ranch, her usually serene face showing signs of worry. "Lucy, I came to warn you. My father is pulling strings. He's already convinced several suppliers not to do business with El Refugio." Mrs. Rose, listening from the doorway with her basket of herbs, chimed in. "This isn't new, kids. Your father has always used money to get his way, Emily." "But this is different," Emily replied. "I've never seen him so furious. He's obsessed with getting Black Lightning back, not for the horse's sake, but for his wounded pride." Lucy stood up and walked to the stable, where the stallion greeted her with a soft whinny. His recovery was progressing admirably. He could now walk without limping, and his eyes had regained their sparkle. "We'll find a solution," she murmured, more to herself than to the horse. "We're already finding it," Manuel announced, following her. "I spoke to the ranchers in the hills. They're willing to sell us feed directly, no middlemen. It's more work because we have to go get it, but—" "Manuel!" Lucy hugged him impulsively. "You're a genius." However, the joy was short-lived. That afternoon, the water truck that regularly supplied El Refugio didn't show up. When Lucy called the company, the response was evasive. Technical problems, indefinite. "This is also my father's doing," Emily confirmed after making some calls. "He bought shares in the water company last week." "We can use water from the creek," Manuel suggested. "It's not ideal, but—" "Not for the sick animals," Mr. Pawley interrupted, arriving for his daily visit. "They need clean water, especially Black Lightning, during his recovery." The news spread quickly through the community. To Lucy's surprise, the response was immediate. Mr. Ramon arrived with his truck full of water jugs. Neighbors began bringing buckets and containers. Even Father Miguel from the local parish offered the church's well. "We're few, Mrs. Rose declared as she organized the water distribution, "but we're united." Ellen, the vet who had testified in court, appeared at dusk with more medical supplies. "I was fired from the estate," she announced with a mix of sadness and pride. "But I have contacts at other clinics. We can get the medications we need." Joseph, who had lost his job as foreman, arrived with valuable information. "Blackwood is planning something big. I heard he hired private investigators to look for any irregularities at El Refugio." "They won't find anything," Lucy said firmly. "Everything we do here is legal and transparent." Yet that night, as she did her final check of the animals, Lucy couldn't help but feel fear. Not for herself, but for everyone who depended on El Refugio. The animals, the workers, the community that had formed around her. Emily, who had stayed to help, sensed her worry. "My father thinks he can buy or destroy anything that stands in his way, but he's never faced someone like you, Lucy." "I'm not as strong as you think," Lucy confessed, stroking Black Lightning's neck. "Sometimes I wonder if I can hold out." "True strength," Mrs. Rose interjected, arriving with hot coffee, "isn't about not being afraid, but about moving forward despite it." The horse whinnied softly, as if agreeing with the elderly woman's words. In his eyes, Lucy saw reflected the same determination he had shown during his recovery, the will to keep fighting, to not give in to adversity. "Tomorrow will be another day," Lucy sighed, watching as the first stars appeared in the sky. "And as long as we're together, we'll find a way to move forward." The arrival of an unfamiliar car at El Refugio always caused unease since the troubles with Blackwood began. However, this time was different. From the elegant vehicle stepped a middle-aged woman, dressed in casual but clearly expensive clothes, carrying a professional camera. "Miss Hernandez," the newcomer asked. "I'm Carmen Sotomayor, a reporter from The National. I'd like to talk about your work here." Lucy exchanged glances with Manuel, who nodded discreetly after checking the reporter's credentials. "How did you hear about us?" Lucy asked as she led Carmen through the facilities. "The story of the racehorse and the heiress of the animal shelter, who stood up to the powerful Alexander Blackwood, is spreading like wildfire in journalistic circles," Carmen explained. "But there's something deeper here, isn't there?" They toured El Refugio. Carmen took photos and notes. She stopped especially at each rescued animal, listening to their stories with genuine interest. When they reached Black Lightning's stable, the horse approached her with curiosity. "It's incredible," the reporter murmured, watching the interaction between Lucy and the stallion. "The connection you have. Can I film you while you work with him?" The photo session was interrupted by the hurried arrival of Ellen. "Lucy, the veterinary lab cancelled all our pending tests. They say they're having technical issues." "Blackwood again," Lucy sighed. "He must have found out they were helping us." Carmen watched the scene with professional interest. "Can I use this in my article? The public needs to know how influence is being used to obstruct legitimate animal protection work." At that moment, Emily arrived with a young, professional-looking man. "Lucy, this is David Gutierrez. He's a social media and digital marketing specialist. And an animal rights activist," David added, shaking Lucy's hand. "Your story needs to be told the right way. People need to understand that this isn't just about a horse, but about a system that allows animal abuse in the name of money." "I'm not looking for publicity," Lucy protested. "I just want to care for the animals in peace." "Sometimes the best defense is visibility," Carmen interjected. "Blackwood can control local businesses, but he can't silence the national media." As they discussed communication strategies, Mr. Paul arrived with surprising news. "The National Veterinary Association is interested in your case, Lucy. They want to document Black Lightning's recovery process as an example of equine rehabilitation." The afternoon turned into a whirlwind of activity. David began creating social media profiles for El Refugio, while Carmen interviewed neighbors and workers. The stories of the community, their resilience and solidarity, were beginning to take shape into something bigger than themselves. "Look at this," David showed his tablet. "We already have thousands of followers. People are sharing their own animal rescue stories." Mrs. Rose, watching everything from her chair on the porch, smiled. "Sometimes, dear, blessings come disguised as problems." However, the calm was interrupted by a call from Joseph. "Blackwood is furious about the media attention. I heard he's planning something big, but I don't know what." "That could be good," Carmen reflected. "If he tries something now with the public eye on El Refugio, it would be a disaster for his image." That night, after everyone had left, Lucy stayed with Black Lightning, processing the day's events. The horse, as if sensing her unease, gently rested his head on her shoulder. "You know something beautiful?" she whispered. "When I found you, I thought I was saving you, but every day I realize more that you're helping all of us find our voice." Emily, who had stayed to help with the last chores, approached. "My father has always believed that money can buy anything, loyalty, silence, power. But he didn't count on something as simple and powerful as love for animals and people's solidarity." In his study, Alexander Blackwood watched on his computer the articles and posts about El Refugio that were beginning to circulate. His face contorted with rage as he read the supportive comments for Lucy. "If they want a media war," he murmured to himself, "I'll give them a war they'll never forget." The sun set over El Refugio, painting the sky in shades of orange. A new battle was coming, but this time Lucy wouldn't be alone. The small community she had built was growing, spreading beyond the physical boundaries of the ranch, touching hearts and consciences in places she could never have imagined. Carmen Sotomayor's report in The National had the effect of a bombshell. El Refugio, David versus Goliath in the fight for animal rights, occupied the front page with a striking photograph of Lucy with Black Lightning. Social media was ablaze with the hashtag #SaveElRefugio, and donations began pouring in from different parts of the country. "Look at this," David exclaimed, showing his laptop to Lucy. 3 international animal protection organizations want to collaborate with us." The atmosphere at El Refugio was one of cautious optimism. Ellen supervised the arrival of new medical supplies, donated by sympathetic vets, while Manuel coordinated with volunteers who came to help. However, the joy didn't last long. That night, the frantic barking of the dogs woke everyone. "Fire!" Manuel's shout echoed in the darkness. "The storage barn is on fire!" Lucy ran toward the stables. The fire was spreading quickly through the feed storage, threatening to reach the main structures. The animals restless whinnied and barked in panic. "Get the animals out," Lucy ordered, running to Black Lightning's stable. The smoke was thick and the flames lit the night with a sinister glow. The community mobilized as one. Mr. Ramon arrived with his truck full of neighbors. Mrs. Rose organized a human chain to pass buckets of water. Emily, who was staying overnight at El Refugio, helped evacuate the smaller animals. "The fire department is on the way," David shouted, who had been calling emergency services. "But it'll take at least 20 minutes. Lucy, with Manuel's help, managed to calm Black Lightning enough to get him out of the stable. The horse, though frightened, still trusted her even in the chaos. Carmen, who had returned for a follow-up on her report, documented everything with her camera. "This wasn't an accident," she shouted, photographing evidence of accelerants on the ground. Ellen worked frantically, tending to animals affected by the smoke. "We need more hydrogen peroxide," she shouted as she cleaned the irritated eyes of an elderly dog. After what felt like an eternity, the fire department finally arrived. By then, the community had managed to contain the worst of the blaze, though the storage barn was completely destroyed. "All the feed," Lucy murmured, looking at the smoldering ruins. "How are we going to feed the animals?" "You're not alone." Emily's voice was firm beside her. "My personal accounts are still intact. We can buy more feed. And I have everything documented," Carmen added, showing the photos on her camera. "The accelerant marks the fire pattern. This was arson." Joseph appeared from the shadows, his face grim. "It was Ramirez, your father's new foreman," he informed Emily. "I heard him bragging about it at the town bar." "This time he went too far," Emily declared, pulling out her phone. "I'm reporting him." "It won't do any good," Mr. Garcia interjected, who had just arrived. "Without direct evidence, it'll be your word against his." "But we have this," Carmen smiled, showing a video on her camera. "I was testing the night vision when I captured something interesting before the fire." The footage, though grainy, clearly showed 2 men pouring liquid around the storage barn. One of them was unmistakably Ramirez. "This changes everything," the lawyer declared. "With this, we can file serious charges." As the sun began to rise, illuminating the damage from the night, the community gathered in the main yard. The animals were safe, though frightened, and the spirit of resistance was stronger than ever. "My father thinks this will make us give up," Emily said, looking at the ruins. "But he's only succeeded in bringing more people to our cause." Lucy, exhausted but determined, stroked Black Lightning, who refused to leave her side. "Every time they try to destroy us, we grow stronger," she reflected. David, who had been updating social media all night, showed his screen. The images of the fire and the community's response had gone viral. Messages of support and offers of help were pouring in from everywhere. "Sometimes," Mrs. Rose said, handing out hot coffee to the volunteers, "fire doesn't just destroy, it also illuminates the truth and forges bonds stronger than steel." At Blackwood Estate, Alexander Blackwood received the news of his plan's failure. His empire was beginning to crumble, not from force, but from the light of truth that was beginning to illuminate his darkest shadows. The investigation into the arson caused a domino effect no one had foreseen. The video captured by Carmen went viral, and soon national media began digging deeper into the Blackwood empire. "Look at this," David pointed to several digital newspapers on his tablet. Other stories are emerging: former employees, ruined competitors, vets who were silenced. Lucy, busy overseeing the reconstruction of the storage barn, could barely process the flood of support coming in. Volunteers from all over appeared at El Refugio, some with building materials, others with animal feed. "It's incredible," she murmured as she watched the work. "A few days ago we didn't know how to move forward, and now—" "It's the power of truth," Carmen replied, still documenting everything. "Once people see the reality behind the facade of power, it's impossible to ignore." Emily arrived with important news. The Brazilian investors are withdrawing their support from the estate. The scandal scared them, and several business partners are distancing themselves from my father. At Blackwood Estate, the atmosphere was tense. Alexander Blackwood, locked in his study, watched as his empire began to crumble. His company's stocks were falling, and banks were beginning to question his loans. "It's your fault," he shouted at his lawyer. "No one was supposed to link the fire to us." "Mr. Blackwood," Ramirez tried to explain, "the problem isn't just legal anymore. Public opinion." "To hell with public opinion," Blackwood roared, but his voice betrayed a hint of worry. Back at El Refugio, Lucy received an unexpected visit. Paulo Santos, the Brazilian trainer, had returned. "Miss Hernandez," he began, watching with admiration Black Lightning's recovery, "I represent a group of investors interested in your work. We don't want to buy the horse, we want to support El Refugio." "He's not for sale," Lucy replied automatically. "You misunderstood," Paulo smiled. "We want to establish an equine rehabilitation program here. Your recovery method with Black Lightning has proven exceptional." Ellen, who was listening to the conversation, chimed in excitedly. "Think about it, Lucy. We could help more horses, expand the facilities." The offer was tempting, but Lucy had doubts. "I don't want to turn El Refugio into a business." "And you don't have to," Paulo assured. "We can set up a non-profit foundation. The money would be used exclusively for animal care." As they discussed the details, more unexpected support arrived. A group of vets from the state university offered to establish a free clinic at El Refugio. Animal protection organizations proposed educational programs. "It's as if the fire lit a different kind of light," Mrs. Rose reflected. "One that shows the true value of what you're doing here." Emily, who had been monitoring the situation at the estate, brought worrying news. "My father is desperate. When desperate people have power, they can be dangerous. But he doesn't have the same power anymore," Carmen pointed out. "His business partners are abandoning him, and the press is investigating his past dealings." At that moment, Joseph arrived with crucial information. Blackwood plans to sell the estate. The debts are piling up, and the banks are demanding additional guarantees. The news caused a stir. Blackwood Estate had been a symbol of power for decades. Its fall represented the end of an era. "I don't feel joy about this," Lucy confessed as she brushed Black Lightning that night. "Only sadness for so much damage caused by pride and ambition." "Sometimes," Emily replied, "old structures need to fall so something new and better can grow." The horse whinnied softly, as if agreeing. His recovery was almost complete, and his eyes shone with new confidence. He was no longer the frightened animal Lucy had found by the creek. "Do you know what's most ironic?" Ellen reflected, as she checked the stallion's leg. "Your father wanted to use Black Lightning to increase his fortune, and in the end, the horse became the catalyst for something much more valuable, real change in how we treat animals." Night fell over El Refugio, but for the first time in weeks, there was no fear in the air. The fire that had sought to destroy them had forged something stronger, a united community, a just cause, and the hope of a better future. The ultimatum came on a rainy morning. Emily found her father waiting for her in the study at Blackwood Estate, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, surrounded by financial documents. "You have to choose now," Alexander Blackwood declared, his voice tense. "You're either with me or against me. If you support me, I'll put half the estate in your name. We can recover together." Emily looked at the man before her, barely recognizing her father in the figure consumed by obsession and resentment. "Recover? At what cost?" "Dad, by continuing to hurt animals, by persecuting innocent people. That girl is destroying us." Blackwood exploded, slamming the desk. "Everything I built, our family's legacy." "No, Dad," Emily replied calmly. "You're destroying it. Your pride, your need for control. When was the last time you truly enjoyed the horses? When did they Stop being living beings and become just investments? Meanwhile, at El Refugio, a transformation was underway. The architects hired by the new foundation presented the plans for expansion: new stables, a modern veterinary clinic, rehabilitation areas. "It's incredible," Lucy commented, looking at the designs. "But how do we ensure we don't lose the essence of El Refugio?" "That's why we want you to stay in charge," Paolo explained. "Your vision, your commitment to the animals is what makes this place special." Ellen, now the veterinary director of the project, nodded enthusiastically. "We'll be able to help so many more animals, Lucy, and train new vets with a different vision of animal care." The conversation was interrupted by Emily's hurried arrival. Her face showed signs of having cried, but her posture was firm. "My father is selling the last horses from the estate," she announced, "to questionable buyers. He doesn't care about their well-being, he just wants quick money." Lucy felt her heart clench. "How many are there?" 15, Emily replied. "Some are sick or injured. The buyers will they'll... She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The fate of horses sold cheaply was often tragic. "We can't allow that," Lucy declared, "but we're just recovering from the fire." "I have savings," Emily interjected, "and I just renounced my inheritance. It's the least I can do." Carmen, who had been documenting El Refugio's transformation, captured the moment with her camera. "This is also part of the story," she murmured. "The daughter who chooses compassion over fortune." The rescue operation was quickly organized. Paolo used his contacts to negotiate with the buyers. Emily's money, combined with emergency donations managed by David through social media, was enough to save the horses. Alexander Blackwood, upon learning of his daughter's intervention, had a fit of rage that shook the estate. "I no longer have a daughter," he shouted, smashing family photographs. That night, as the 15 horses adapted to their new home at El Refugio, Emily cried silently, sitting beside Black Lightning. "Don't cry," Lucy whispered, sitting beside her. "Sometimes family isn't the one we're born into, but the one we build with our hearts." "I know," Emily smiled through her tears. "It's just that I hoped he'd understand in the end." Mrs. Rose, bringing blankets for Emily, who would stay at El Refugio, shared her wisdom. "Some trees are so rigid they break in the storm, while others bend and survive. Your father chose his path, dear, and you chose yours." Black Lightning, sensing Emily's sadness, gently rested his head on her shoulder. The gesture, so simple and pure, brought more tears, but these were different. They were tears of liberation. "It's funny," Emily reflected, stroking the horse. "This animal my father saw only as an investment taught me more about love and loyalty than all his lessons on business and power." The moon shone over El Refugio, illuminating the strange family that had formed. People and animals united by love and compassion, stronger than any bond of blood or money. In the distance, the lights of Blackwood Estate went out one by one as a new day dawned on the horizon. The news exploded like thunder in the community. Blackwood Estate would be auctioned to pay off debts. Local and national newspapers covered the fall of the equestrian empire, while Alexander Blackwood barricaded himself in his study, refusing any contact with the outside world. "The banks have seized everything," Emily explained to Lucy as they reviewed the new stables at El Refugio. "Investigations revealed financial irregularities dating back years." "How do you feel?" Lucy asked, noticing the mix of emotions on her friend's face. "Strangely at peace," Emily replied. "It's like a weight has been lifted. No more secrets, no more pretenses." El Refugio, meanwhile, was flourishing. The free veterinary clinic served animals from across the region, and the equine rehabilitation program had become a model, studied by universities in several countries. "Look at this," Ellen pointed to the results of the latest research. "The technique we developed with Black Lightning is being implemented in rehabilitation centers across the country." Carmen, who had been documenting the transformation for months, was preparing a documentary. "It's not just an animal story," she explained as she filmed the daily activities. "It's a story of social transformation, of how a community can come together for a just cause." David coordinated educational visits from local schools. Children learned about responsible animal care, while Black Lightning, now an unofficial ambassador, charmed them with his majestic presence. "It's incredible how he's changed," Manuel commented, watching the stallion interact gently with the young visitors, from a stressed racehorse to a teacher of kindness. The transformation wasn't limited to the animals. Joseph, now the supervisor of training programs, taught young riders techniques based on respect and mutual understanding. "Before I thought strength was the only way," he confessed during a class. "Now I know that true connection with a horse comes from the heart." One afternoon, as Lucy supervised the construction of the new rehabilitation center, surprising news arrived. Several former employees of Blackwood Estate were applying for jobs at El Refugio. "They've learned the hardest lesson," Mrs. Rose commented, now directing the volunteer program. "That true success isn't measured in money, but in the good we do." Paolo, who traveled regularly to oversee the program, brought investors from different countries interested in replicating El Refugio's model. "What you've built here," he declared during a meeting, "is more than an animal shelter. It's proof that there's another way to do things." Emily, who had found her calling in managing educational programs, received an unexpected letter from her father. With trembling hands, she read it privately beside Black Lightning. "He says he's sorry," she shared later with Lucy, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He doesn't ask for forgiveness, but he acknowledges he was wrong. It's a start." The transformation of El Refugio had catalyzed deeper changes in the community. Blackwood's former supporters now saw the value of a more ethical and sustainable approach. "People are understanding," Ellen reflected as she tended to a new group of rescued animals. "The true power isn't in domination but in care." One afternoon, as the sun set over the new stables, Lucy found Black Lightning in his favorite paddock. The horse, fully recovered, galloped freely, his black coat gleaming in the golden light. "Who would have thought," Emily murmured, standing beside her, "that an injured horse would change so many lives?" "It wasn't just the horse," Lucy replied, smiling. "It was people's willingness to do what's right, even when it seemed impossible." El Refugio had become a beacon of hope, showing that change was possible when compassion and determination came together. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. Night fell softly over the ranch, the stars shining over the renovated stables and green fields. In his paddock, Black Lightning whinnied softly, as if expressing his approval of the new world he had helped create. A year had passed since that morning, when Lucy found Black Lightning by the creek. El Refugio celebrated its first anniversary as an official foundation with a special event, the inauguration of its community veterinary school. "If someone had told me a year ago that we'd be here," Lucy reflected as she watched the crowd gathered in the new gardens, "I would have thought I was dreaming." The place was unrecognizable compared to the modest ranch of its beginnings. The modern stables blended harmoniously with the natural landscape, and the green paddocks stretched as far as the eye could see. But what was most impressive was the energy of the place, the atmosphere of healing and hope that permeated every corner. "You've created something extraordinary," Carmen commented, who had returned for the inauguration ceremony. Her documentary about El Refugio had gained international recognition and inspired similar initiatives in other countries. "I didn't create it alone," Lucy corrected. "Everyone here contributed something special." Emily, elegant in her new role as Director of Educational Programs, approached with a surprise. "Look who came," she pointed toward the entrance. Alexander Blackwood, noticeably aged and thinner, walked uncertainly through the crowd. Nothing remained of his former arrogance. In its place was a humility no one would have believed possible. "Emily," he called softly upon seeing his daughter. "I wasn't sure if I should come." "I'm glad you did," she replied, hugging him cautiously. Lucy watched the scene from a distance beside Black Lightning. The stallion, now in the prime of his recovery, had become a living symbol of transformation and hope. "Your father has changed," Ellen commented, joining Lucy. "His time in rehab has done him good." After losing everything, Alexander Blackwood had spent months in a recovery center, facing his own demons. The letter he had sent to Emily was just the beginning of a long process of reconciliation. The ceremony began with a moment no one could have imagined. Alexander Blackwood, invited by Emily, took the podium to share his experience. "For years," he began, his voice trembling but clear, "I believed that power and money were the only measures of success. I saw animals as commodities, people as tools. I was wrong." The silence in the audience was absolute. Some of his former employees, now part of El Refugio's team, listened with tears in their eyes. "My daughter, and this extraordinary young woman," he continued, looking at Lucy, "taught me a lesson it took me a lifetime to learn, that true greatness lies in compassion, not control." Black Lightning, as if understanding the importance of the moment, approached the podium. Alexander Blackwood looked at him with a mix of remorse and admiration. "This horse," he said, "whom I once saw only as an investment, helped me see my own humanity reflected in his eyes." After the ceremony, as the guests toured the facilities, Lucy found a moment to be alone with Black Lightning in his favorite paddock. "Who would have thought," she whispered as she brushed him, "that finding you that morning would change so many lives?" The horse responded with a soft whinny, his bright eyes reflecting the sunset's light. No trace remained of the frightened, injured animal he had been. In his place was a majestic being combining strength and gentleness. Emily joined them, followed by her father, who kept a respectful distance. "Horses are better teachers than most humans," Alexander Blackwood said softly. "They forgive but never forget. They teach us to be better people." As the sun set over El Refugio, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lucy reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with an act of compassion by a creek. The circle seemed complete, but in reality it was just the beginning of something much greater. Night fell softly, bringing with it the promise of a new dawn. In the stables, the animals rested peacefully, each with their own story of recovery and hope. The legacy of Black Lightning would continue to inspire future generations, reminding them that true power lies in the ability to transform suffering into healing, fear into trust, and loneliness into community. 5 years after that first encounter by the creek, El Refugio had become a beacon of hope and transformation that shone far beyond its borders. On a quiet spring morning, Lucy walked the ranch's paths, marveling at how her small act of compassion had blossomed into something extraordinary. "Aunt Lucy," a child's voice interrupted her thoughts. Anna, the first student of El Refugio's children's education program, ran toward her excitedly. "Black Lightning has special visitors." In the main paddock, a group of children with various disabilities was participating in their first equine therapy session. The majestic black stallion, now with some gray hairs that only added to his dignity, worked gently with them, showing a patience and sensitivity that moved everyone present. "It's incredible," Ellen, now the director of the rehabilitation program, commented. "After all he's been through, he's become our most intuitive therapist." Emily, who coordinated the educational activities, joined them. "Remember when my father said an injured horse had no value?" she reflected with a bittersweet smile. "Now Black Lightning has helped heal more lives than we can count." El Refugio had become much more than an animal sanctuary. It was a center for alternative veterinary medicine research, an equine therapy school, and a model of ethical management inspiring similar projects worldwide. Alexander Blackwood, now collaborating as an advisor in the program for rehabilitating abused horses, approached, leaning on his cane. The years had softened his temper, and his eyes shone with a wisdom born of remorse and redemption. "Every time I see a horse regain its trust," he shared softly, "I see my own story of healing." Joseph, now the lead instructor of the ethical riding program, was teaching a practical class nearby. "The secret," he explained to his students, "isn't to dominate the horse, but to earn its trust and respect." The community around El Refugio had also flourished. Mrs. Rose, though no longer able to do heavy work, remained the spiritual heart of the place, sharing her wisdom with new generations of caregivers. "Look," she pointed to a group of foals playing in a nearby paddock. "They're the offspring of rescued mares. They were born free of fear, knowing only love and respect. Carmen, who had returned to film an update of her documentary, captured these scenes with her camera. "This is the real story of transformation," she commented, "not just of the animals, but of an entire community." At sunset, Lucy led Black Lightning to his favorite spot by the creek, where it all began. The horse drank calmly from the clear water, as the last rays of sunlight gilded his black coat. "Thank you," she whispered, stroking his neck, "for teaching us that true strength comes from kindness." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the sounds of laughter and whinnies from El Refugio. The place that had once been a modest ranch was now a living testament to the transformative power of love and compassion. Emily joined them, bringing her young daughter Rose, named after Mrs. Rose. The girl, just 3 years old, approached Black Lightning without fear, and the horse gently lowered his head to greet her. "Mommy," she asked, "will you tell me the story of the brave horse and the girl from the ranch again?" Lucy and Emily exchanged knowing glances. It was a story now told in many places, a story that reminded everyone that a simple act of kindness could spark a revolution of compassion. "Once upon a time," Emily began, "a horse and a young woman met by a creek on an ordinary morning. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of hope. At El Refugio, the animals prepared to rest, each with their own story of recovery and rebirth. Black Lightning, the proud stallion who had once been a symbol of power and ambition, was now an ambassador of a new way of understanding the relationship between humans and animals. And so in that tranquil sunset, the story came to an end, but its message would continue to resonate in the hearts of all who heard it. That true power lies not in domination, but in compassion, not in material wealth, but in the wealth of the spirit. The legacy of Black Lightning and El Refugio would live on in every act of kindness, in every life transformed, in every heart that dared to believe in the healing power of love.